Welcome back to the channel, guys, and today we are going to be reviewing the 2025 Ram 2500 and 3500 trucks. We're calling these a 5.5 gen, a split headlight 5th gen, a 4.75 gen, whatever you want to call it. This has been completely redesigned under the skin. Now, I've seen everywhere people are saying that these trucks are underwhelming them because they look pretty similar. But just like in 2007.5, when Ram redesigned the whole powertrain underneath the familiar 3rd gen body, these trucks have a lot that doesn't meet the eye. So let's dig into these. I am going to get technical about the engine and transmission changes, and today we're going to talk about what it's like to drive these trucks, all the stuff that has been changed, and most importantly, are these things actually worth it? Let's dive in. So let's start with the engine. We're looking at 430 horsepower and 1,075 foot-pounds of torque. We are still doing 6.7 liters of displacement, but outside of that, pretty much nothing is shared with the previous 6.7 trucks. The engine changes include a move back to a cast iron block, a new cylinder head, new side flow intake manifold, over-the-air calibration updates, of course, the 8-speed transmission everyone's been talking about, and a lot of different changes, mostly driven by emission standards, but we're going to dive into that a little bit in a second. Now, starting from the bottom, the reason why Cummins decided to completely redesign the block was actually for cooling. In order to meet those new power specs, Cummins felt like they had to re-engineer the coolant passages of the block, and while they were in there, basically redesigned absolutely everything to do with the block. So they moved away from the CGI block to a standard cast iron block. When pressed on why they made this change, apparently it was, one, because it's a little bit easier to machine, a little bit easier to work with, and for them it's going to be a much easier manufacturing process and something they can have better QC on. While we're doing that, they also completely redid all of the coolant flow in the engine. That was to help with the increased power output, but is also going to be delivering more even cooling, different water jackets around the pistons. Everything about this is going to be completely redesigned. Another notable change that you will notice as a customer immediately is the relocation of the fuel and oil filters. I, for one, think this is a fantastic change. As the owner of a 2020 Cummins, the oil filter location is awful, and the fuel filter locations are even worse. So it is a welcome change to see both these as top-load canister filters on the engine block. The oil filter is about as easy as it gets, hands down one of the better designs on the market in terms of maintenance and ease of maintenance for the customer. I would say the fuel filters leave a little bit to be desired. They're kind of buried in there, but at least having both of them easily accessible on the top of the engine is nice. Now, speaking of fuel, this is where there was a huge and notable change going on. Now, you're all probably familiar with the CP4 recalls. This has happened on Ford, Ram, GM, you name it. This is a pretty issue-plagued fuel pump. So obviously Cummins is going to move away from that. They did a recall on the early 5th gen trucks to move them to the CP3, but for these trucks, we are getting the CP8, and this is a completely and totally redesigned fuel pump from Bosch. This is working with top feed dry injectors, and now the pump injectors are capable of 39,000 PSI, whereas the previous gen CP4 pump was only capable of 32,000 PSI. That means increased power, increased efficiency, and that is due to better atomization of the fuel. Now, if you're like me and you're wondering, what did they do to address reliability? Well, they actually did quite a lot. Essentially, what's happening here is almost like a factory disaster prevention kit, if you're familiar with what that is. The actual lubrication fuel and the injection fuel are now separated in the pump. So the fuel that is used for lubrication passes through the pump in a completely separate side from what's going to the engine, and then goes back through fuel filters and then back into the tank. So thankfully, due to that huge design change, gone are the issues of the CP4 pump that would fill your fuel system with shrapnel if the pump grenaded. This pump now has basically a filter built in line to protect the fuel system from damage. While they redesigned the engine, they also completely reworked airflow. This is going to be happening through the side draft intake manifold, as well as the move to glow plugs. That's going to allow for better airflow, faster start times, and no more grid heater. Now, the move away from the grid heater is awesome because, one, we've all heard about the grid heater bolt issues and causing engine failure, but also we've probably all seen the clogged up grid heaters from the EGR pushing soot back into the engine. Gone is all of that issue. Now we have a awesome flowing side draft intake and glow plugs. This is going to make for a faster start time, and I think all around a welcome change to the engine. Now, this is weird because as a Cummins enthusiast, from 89 to current, we've used a grid heater, but the departure from this, I think, is all in good reason, and I think overall this is going to be a solid move for the truck. Now, speaking of airflow, Cummins also completely reworked the turbo. This is now a Holset 300 VGT, and the turbo allows for almost zero lag while driving the truck. That, coupled with the transmission, is a dramatic change in how this truck feels on the road. The reason for this turbo change was that Cummins completely redesigned the emissions after treatment system. And I know no one likes this, but all of this is very useful and very important stuff to make for a more reliable truck. To meet modern emission standards and to make the whole system more efficient and more reliable, Cummins actually changed the diesel oxidation catalyst, or DOC, to up towards the engine. It's actually located directly behind the turbo, which is what spurred this turbo change to begin with. This is huge as it's able to harness the heat more effectively to run more efficiently and reduce nitrogen oxide emissions. It's also going to allow more control of the temperature that is going to the DPF. Now, speaking of the DPF, Cummins is actually now using an external hydrocarbon doser, which is basically essentially a seventh fuel injector in the exhaust system. In layman's terms, what's happening is basically they're getting better control over the whole after treatment system. Ideally, you want to rely more on the DEF injection in urea than you do on EGR, and the DOC moving up closer towards the turbo is going to allow that to happen. And more importantly, you want better control over the DPF and how that's working and all the temperature related to that so that you can more effectively burn out all the soot with less ash. Again, this is all happening here. So ideally, this is all going to be a very well thought out system that should hopefully be significantly more reliable than what's on the trucks now. Now, all of this translates to what Cummins claims is 7% better fuel economy when comparing a 24 3500 Ram Cummins to a 25 3500 Ram Cummins. You know, 7% isn't a huge number, but I would say that is definitely moving in the right direction when these trucks are already pretty efficient. Now, one final thing that they've talked about that I find a little bit interesting, and we'll kind of have to see how this plays out, is that there will be now over-the-air calibration updates. I, for one, am definitely curious to see exactly what all that entails, and if there's essentially over-the-air monitoring of the calibration on the truck, or how exactly all that system works. The other big change that everyone is talking about is the transmission. This has been much needed. As everyone knows, the 68 RFE was well past its time, originally being introduced in 2007 and a half. The ZF8 HP is the new transmission that's behind this truck, and initially everyone thought it was be kind of based on the ZF transmission that was used behind the Hemi trucks. That was already being used in the Hemi 5th gen trucks, but this has been essentially completely reworked and is dramatically improved, more robust. Everything about it is basically redesigned to be behind the Cummins and hopefully allow for future powertrain updates. The other nice thing is that there's been some major gear changes from the 68 RFE. So I've seen people online basically imagining this is just 2 extra gears tacked onto the current ratios of the 68 RFE. No, everything has been completely reworked, and this transmission is actually designed to start in 2nd gear in typical situations. I would say overall the transmission shifting feels much more logical, much more thought out. I'll get into that in a second, but I would say this is definitely a huge step in the right direction. Discerning eyes may also note that the Ram trucks have now been moved from a 373 default ratio, which was present on the 19 to 24 trucks, back to a 342, which is like the 14 to 18 Rams. Now, everyone's a little bit hesitant about this, but keep in mind the transmission ratios are significantly changed. So gearing at the axles is only part of the picture. You also have to account for gearing at the transmission, and that has been massively altered in these. In my 2 cents, this truck behind me is on 38-inch tires. I would say this truck didn't really lug, didn't really have any issues, and I can't really say the same for the 373 trucks backed by 68. So this is, again, a huge step in the right direction. Now that we've gotten the powertrain stuff out of the way, let's deal with everything else that's changed on the truck, and this is honestly a much shorter list. We've got a complete rework of the front end. We now have brand new headlights. This is going to be a split headlight design with the high beams on top, low beams on bottom, and a plastic trim piece separating them. A complete rework of the grille, and I will definitely say some of these grills are a little bit polarizing. Definitely the Rebel package trucks are a little busy and interesting, but the truck behind me, the limited trim, I do really like the grill on. The Laramie, I really like the grill on. So I would say while this is a little bit polarizing, the front end changes, definitely all stuff that's kind of a nice step in the right direction to modernize the front end of the truck. At the rear, you're also going to see some minor design tweaks. You're going to see the taillights now change, as well as the large Ram lettering across the tailgate of the truck. Other notable changes are going to be happening on the interior of the truck. They've made some slight tweaks to the center head unit on the truck. The display is now absolutely massive. It actually protrudes above the dash on the truck, but it's really well integrated. They've actually moved things like the exhaust brake function onto the screen. So there's going to be just a lot more integration into the truck through the head unit. You're going to be pretty much controlling everything on the truck through the touchscreen head unit. There's also, just like the 23 Up trucks, a digital display that's going to show you everything you need to see, and it's all configurable. So you can go through and change what gauges are shown on the screen, how they're displayed. You have a lot of control over what's going on there. I really like how configurable it is. That said, I do think that Ford did a much better job of actually showing data from the truck. Things like gauges, I think, are just in a more condensed view than on this truck. You can really only see a few things at a time. So I do think Ford and some other manufacturers have done a better job of kind of integrating gauges and like necessary towing features into the display screen. Of course, the other big change is the passenger side display, and I apologize, this was very difficult to film. Whatever coding they have on these displays makes them extremely difficult to film for you guys, but the passenger display I thought was a bit of a gimmick, and it still is kind of a gimmick, but it's a little more useful of a gimmick than I thought. So you can control things like sending directions to the driver. So I can actually look up directions if I'm a passenger and send them over to the driver. I can actually look up cameras on the truck. So your passenger can take a look at what's going on in the bed of the truck, if anything's blowing out, take a look at the trailer hitch on the truck. And they can also control the music. So they can send songs to the driver, change songs that are playing. It's a nice little feature. And it also has an HDMI port as well. So you can, in theory, stream movies via a large HDMI port. I don't know who's really using those these days, but if you have a full-size HDMI cable laying around and somehow have something to hook it up to, you can play a movie on the passenger screen. Curiously, I asked my wife what she thought of this, and she said it's kind of a gimmick, but we'll see. We'll see how useful it actually ends up being, but I do think it's kind of a nifty feature, and I'm seeing a lot of OEMs moving to this. Audi, you name it, are pretty much all putting in passenger side screens, so I guess Ram felt like they had to keep up. Outside of that, there are a couple things that are notably absent. There is no heads-up display. This is something that we're seeing on GM and Ford HD trucks. I found it extremely useful. It's not on this truck. Another thing that I think is basically inexcusable at this point to not have on a truck, particularly a limited trim truck, is a telescoping steering column. I'm 6'4", and I find that this truck is a little bit uncomfortable to drive because there's no telescoping steering column. Don't know why Ram decided to leave that out, but they did. Other notable things that are not changed on this truck, the cab. They are still running the same cab from 2010 on these trucks. They're really dragging it out. And I think we can blame kind of the mismanagement of Chrysler as a whole through Fiat and then Stellantis. When Stellantis really tried to drive this thing into the ground, that is a whole other topic. But I'm really hoping in the next couple of years, they decide to finally redo the cab on this truck. That said, all things considered, I don't think this truck is particularly uncomfortable. It's actually, when you really take a step back, obviously a lot of us are upset about the lack of a cab change, but as a whole, this truck is honestly still kind of competitive in the market in terms of the cab, and the drivetrain resort was really lacking compared to GM and Ford, and now they've completely stepped that up. So what is this truck like to drive? Well, if you have a 23 to 24 truck, it's actually gonna feel pretty similar. The big thing that's going to be changing is obviously what the powertrain itself feels like. I would say this is where there are huge leaps forward to modernize this truck. If you own a 6.7 Ram, particularly the 14 to current trucks, you know exactly what I'm talking about when I say these trucks have incredible dead pedal. Between the torque management to save the 68 RFE behind the engine and then the turbo lag, the truck is just really dead off the line. And if you go and drive a Duramax or Power Stroke, you actually really appreciate how far behind these trucks have been. This new engine design and the ZF 8-speed transmission completely correct that. This truck is way snappier off the line, it comes alive, and it does an amazing job at delivering low-end torque. The new transmission is also doing an amazing job at shifting appropriately. I always really disliked how the 68 RFE felt like it would lug, it would hold on to gears, and when you went to accelerate out of like a steady cruise, it would just hang onto that gear and lug the truck to death. With the new ZF, it is quick and snappy to downshift. It knows what you want to do. It quickly does it. And I feel like this transmission is so much smarter and better at adapting. This is much more in line with what we're seeing from Ford and GM in their HD trucks. And this is a much needed change for the Ram platform. Now, the burning question here, of course, is this truck actually worth the upgrade? And I would liken this to what it's like with what we're seeing out of phones right now. So if you look at an iPhone 16 to an iPhone 15, right, it's just a small evolutionary change. They're changing the processor, the camera's a little bit better. You know, it's logical steps towards a better phone, but it's not gonna feel like a night and day complete dramatic redesign. That's basically what it feels like from this truck if you already have a 5th gen or basically 23 to 24 truck. Let's say you have a 4th gen or 3rd gen though, this thing is going to feel like a dramatic improvement. And I would say this is much more in line with what you would be seeing from Ford and GM. This is a much more competitive truck overall. Let's be honest, the interior of these trucks is fantastic. It's not uncomfortable, it's not bad. While we'd all like to see a new cab out of them, it's not like these cabs are bad at all. And I love the Mega Cab, the extra space, and that's not really offered from any other platform. I have a feeling when Ram redesigns the cabs, the Mega Cab will be going away. We'll see if that happens, but that's my personal hunch. All in all, while a lot of people were disappointed in this update, I would say this is actually a pretty solid update for things that matter. If you are actually someone that uses these trucks, that appreciates them, these are all meaningful changes to the drivetrain and powertrain that have been much needed for a long time. These are all things that are going to translate to better towing, better fuel economy, better overall drivability, and hopefully better reliability. If you look at all the things that Cummins changed, they basically went exactly after each failure point or issue that's experienced on previous Cummins trucks. Again, with the transmission, they went after all the weak points of the 68 RFE and completely redesigned them. So they're basically taking what's been a good truck and targeting after each individual little thing that's held that truck back. Now, how does this compare against the new Ford and new GM trucks? I personally would rank them as Ford first, Ram second, GM third. I will be doing a more in-depth video on those 3 head-to-head, but that's my SparkNote summary. But I would say this has really brought Ram into the modern era. It's been a welcome update. And yeah, I would say overall, it's a pretty solid truck behind me. One other thing I want to note, and this is actually pretty impactful, is that Ram's pricing has been really competitive. If you look at GM and you look at Ford, Ford is being rumored to do a redesign in 26, 27, but in terms of pricing, you're actually getting more truck per dollar spent with Ram. Ram has been more competitive on discounts, and I think they acknowledge that their truck is a little bit older as a whole platform, and so they have been more willing to discount the trucks. The truck behind me was $10,000 off sticker as a brand new order for 2025. You're not going to be seeing that from Ford, and you're not going to be seeing that from GM. So for what it's worth, I think if you're looking as a value-focused shopper, the Ram trucks are going to be where it's at. It's a fantastic truck, complete redesigned powertrain, and you're getting it for less than you would get a GM or Ford truck. So hopefully that helps you guys get a walkthrough of more of the nitty-gritty on these trucks, what's different, how it impacts the driving experience, and everything else. If you have any questions, please ask them down below. I am more than happy to answer anything you guys want to know, and thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, subscribe, there'll be more like it.